Jazakallah to the organizers, iConsult, for creating this platform. May Allah Ta'ala bless you guys and make your organization grow from strength to strength. Our session today focuses on Takaful, or Islamic insurance, and how it can play an active part in achieving the sustainable development goals. The insurance industry has traditionally focused on just mitigating risk, making sure that individuals and businesses can cope with economic impact of losses. However, the role of the insurance industry and the Takaful industry has substantially widened in the last couple of years. An increasing number of regulators, companies, and industry role players have recognized the importance that the industry plays in achieving sustainable strategies. Our esteemed panel, which represents a broad spectrum of the industry, will inshallah start a dialogue to raise awareness of the current progress and discuss opportunities for Takaful as important role players to support sustainable development goals. But before I introduce our individual members, being here in Cape Town and talking about Takaful, it would be remiss for me not to mention our beloved late Shaykh Taha Karam. Shaykh Taha played a huge and important part in the development of the Islamic finance industry. His immense contribution to me personally and to the Takaful industry cannot be understated. May Allah fill his qabr with Noor and grant him the highest stages of Jannah. So in terms of our panelists, Alhamdulillah, we got our Shaykh Ziyaad Mohammed, Shaykh Ziyaad Mohammed, or Dr Sa'id Mikail. Brother Ziyaad Mohammed, I don't know what to call him. He's an associate professor at the Institute University of Malaysia. He lectures in Sharia risk management and social finance. He was a project lead for several large Takaful sustainability and fintech projects in Malaysia, involving social impact measurement and sustainable product development. He is the chairman of the Sharia board of IAD Takaful in the Maldives and led the project in drafting the value-based Takaful framework for Malaysia. He was also involved in the launch of Takaful regulation in Nigeria in 2012. Jazakallah Shaykh Ziyaad. We got Shaykh Dr Sa'id Mikail. Dr. Mikail was introduced yesterday, but I'll just go through it. He's got a long CV here. But he's a researcher at the Israel Research Management Center at NCF. He's registered Sharia advisor in Malaysia, in the UK, and he's a member of an IFA working committee on the curriculum review. He's a chairman of Sharia committee of BNP Paribas and serves on a number of Sharia committees across Malaysia and other countries. He's written a number of journals and books and articles on Islamic finance, and is definitely an expert in the industry. We got Alex Simeonides. Alex, I know you knew we would get that. Alex is the CEO of Capital Legacy. Alex is an experienced financial advisor who has worked for both Discovery and Liberty Life Limited. He's ranking as a top advisor for several years for each company. He has also successfully run one of the top 3 brokerages in South Africa, and as one of the founding members of Capital Legacy, he is driven by the desire to see fewer families affected by the unexpected consequences of deceased estate fees and expenses. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for being here. Noor Habib. Noor Habib has been involved in the Islamic insurance industry since 2003. He was part of the first Takaful company in South Africa, Takaful South Africa. He performed various functions across underwriting, claims, marketing, and really gained experience in the Takaful industry through that time. In 2009, Noor established Ammanah Financial Services. Ammanah is one of the very few Islamic financial services company that provides only Sharia compliant products. In 2015, he was instrumental in helping Bryte set up the Takaful Africa product, and 2019, Noor started an administrator for Bryte that focuses on Takaful companies. Last is Mufti Ahmed Sulei. Mufti Ahmed Sulei, let me just find here, is a Sharia scholar of high repute in the Islamic banking, investments, and insurance space. He served as a Sharia advisor for and and as a board member on various financial institutes for the past 17 years, both inside and outside South Africa. He completed his Alim course and thereafter completed the Iftar course at Darul Uloom Zakaria. For 3 years he served as a mufti for the Jamiatul Ulama in KZN, where he looked after the fatwa and judicial departments and was a member of the mediation and arbitration committee. On behalf of the Jamiatul Ulama, he served as a member on the board of Muftis of South Africa. Mufti was also one of the first Muftis that was on the Sharia board of Takaful South Africa. So those are our esteemed panelists. Me personally, I've been involved in the Takaful industry for over 20 years, and I've seen the industry grow from strength to strength. We have seen the numbers grow, but we've seen the product range grow. From a simple domestic Takaful product, catering only for personal lines, we've seen now very niche products launch in the short-term market. We've got life products launched, and just recently we've seen that Discovery have launched a Sharia-compliant medical aid product. As an industry, our key purpose is to advance societal resilience. We do this by strengthening society's ability to bounce back after a loss. Takaful as a risk protection mechanism can support many of the SDG goals. When I looked at it, there's probably about 11 of those goals that Takaful has a direct or indirect impact on. And so it's important for us to deal with Takaful and use Takaful to get to those goals. But I think to start off, and maybe Mufti Ahmed, we can start with you, just to highlight the difference between Takaful and conventional insurance, and perhaps you can focus on the social benefit of uniting people for a common cause.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah Uwaiz. I think before we understand what Takaful is, we need to understand why conventional insurance, as we know it, is not permissible. Sing clear. From a technical Islamic jurisprudence perspective, the scholars have noted a few non-compliant or non-permissible elements in a contract of insurance. So what is a contract of insurance? A person pays a premium in exchange for some policy benefits. So the key word that we're going to concentrate on is the element of exchange. A person pays a premium, 1,000 rands a month, for example, in a short-term insurance space, and he meets up in an accident, so he pays for 10 months, 1,000 rands a month, and he ends up paying 10,000 rands. Then he has a claim. The claim is unlikely going to be 10,000 rands, but unlikely going to be 10,000 rands. So he's going to claim maybe 11,000, 20,000, 50,000, or maybe 5,000, depending on the event. So the scholars have said that in this type of contract of exchange, it is classified as a contract of exchange. In the contract of exchange, if there is an exchange of money, the person is paying premiums, which is in rands, and he's collecting his benefit in rands, or the value, it's the value that he's collecting, but it's also in rands. In that case, it needs to be in equal amounts. If it's not in equal amounts, it's something we refer to as riba or interest. When a person pays an amount of money and receives something in exchange which is not equal to what he paid, the definition of riba. The second element, which is not permissible, is that of chance. A person pays, and the exchange of what he pays for is dependent on a happening. He must meet up in an accident first, as an example, then only can he claim his exchange. And thirdly, the concept of uncertainty or excessive uncertainty. When a person pays, he does not know for how long he's going to pay. He does not know when there is an event that he can claim for and what will be the value of that claim. A person may pay, by example, 10,000 rands because he paid 1,000 rand a month, and then he has a claim. Nobody knows the value of the claim. It's excessive uncertainty, which is not allowed in the contract of exchange. So how do we create a Takaful model? It's simple. All we do is we take out the element of exchange. We take out the element of exchange, and then it's no longer a contract of exchange. And then it becomes a permissible contract. How do we do that? Before I explained that to you, I would like to refer to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ refers to a tribe of the people of Medina. He said, إِنَّ الْأَشْعَرِيِّينَ إِذَا أَرْمَلُوا فِي الْغَزْوِ أَوْ قَلَّ طَعَامُ عِيَالِهِمْ وَهُمْ بِالْمَدِينَةِ جَمَعُوا مَا كَانَ عِنْدَهُمْ فِي إِنَاءٍ وَاحِدٍ ثُمَّ اقْتَسَمُوهَا بَيْنَهُمْ بِالسَّوِيَّةِ فَهُمْ مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُمْ. The people of this tribe, when they go out on an expedition and they find that their provisions are being depleted, or even if they are in Medina Munawwara at home and they find that their provisions are being depleted, جَمَعُوا مَا كَانَ عِنْدَهُمْ فِي إِنَاءٍ وَاحِدٍ. They would all get together and contribute to a common pool. Who would give? One person would give maybe, just to make the example easy, 100 grams of dates. Another person would give maybe 1 kilogram of dates. Another person may give 3 kilograms of dates, depending on what each person has. So they will put it into that container. ثُمَّ اقْتَسَمُوهَا بَيْنَهُمْ بِالسَّوِيَّةِ. And then whatever is in that container, they'll distribute it or redistribute it among themselves equally. فَهُمْ مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُمْ. They are from me and I am from them. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged this behavior and this action. If we analyze this from a technical jurisprudence perspective, we will find that the exchange, Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi mentioned in the commentary of Sahih Muslim, that the exchange or the item that was being, if you say inverted commas, exchanged or contributed, the item was what? It was dates. And we know from the prophetic hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that when you exchange dates for dates, it needs to be in equal quantity. So if I give you 1 kilogram of dates, you cannot give me 2 kilograms of dates. Why? Because that will become an interest-bearing transaction based on the definition of the hadith. So if the Prophet ﷺ allowed the pooling concept, it meant that the pooling concept is not a contract of exchange. It is a contract of benevolence, or what we refer to as a contract of contribution or donations, where people put whatever they have, or they put something for the common cause of the general public, or for the common cause of the people of that particular grouping. So the ulama have mentioned that there's 2 ways of doing this. The one way is to create the separate pool, which has its own legal standing, and the other way of doing it is to actually create a waqf. Why? Because a waqf from a Sharia perspective, an Islamic endowment, is something which, without any difference of opinion amongst the ulama, it is something which can own, it is something which can sue, can be sued, etc. So when we create a takaful, we create this pool. This pool then could take the form of a waqf, the Islamic endowment. Then the waqf owns the assets of the pool, and people who contribute to the waqf are members, and based on the rules of the waqf, they will be entitled to receive benefits from the waqf. The benefit that you receive, it will be very similar to an insurance contract, but the underlying construct is very different. It's no longer a contract of exchange, which made it impermissible. So a person may say that, you're taking your hand and holding your wheel the other way around. Sometimes we say, yes, we will do it that way. Outwardly it may look differently, but we will do it that way. Why? Because that is the requirement of Sharia. And if the requirement of Sharia means you have to go along a long-about way of doing something, then we will do it for the purposes of it being Sharia compliant. So in this particular example, people will contribute either to the waqf or to the separate legal entity, and the separate legal entity would then have its rules, and the rules will mirror the rules of an insurance contract, whether it's long-term, short-term, etc. The rules would say if you meet up in an accident, then you will have your car fixed, as an example. The rules would say if you had smooth tires and you bumped into somebody, then you will not be covered, etc., etc. So you are allowed. Sharatul Waqif, Kanassi Sharik, the ulama have mentioned that the conditions of the person who establishes the work for the Islamic endowment, those conditions will be upheld as the text of the Quran and Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Obviously, unless it's going to make something halal, haram, or the other way around. So as we can see from the example, the benefit, the social benefit of Takaful is that people are contributing, and when people contribute to a common cause, it is the monies that sit in that pool obviously are halal, and then that money is available for the benefit of the entire pool. I'll just end off on one last point of certainty, because Alex is on my left-hand side and we'll probably talk about long-term. I remember one day I was in Nigeria and the person said, you talk about uncertainty, but in life insurance, every person knows you're going to die, so there's no uncertainty. So the answer is simple. You don't know when you're going to die. You're going to contribute till you die, and you're going to pay every month, and you do not know how long you're going to take to reach that point. So there's still uncertainty at that point as well.
I think that was a comprehensive response in terms of explaining Takaful. Dr. Sa'id, maybe you can pick up on that and maybe explain in terms of the objectives of Sharia and how does Takaful tie into the objectives of Sharia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. الحمد لله. I would like to thank the organizing committee again and again, and also all the participants, because you prepare this kind of very informative forum without turning up of the participant, it is of no use as well. So that's why we need to also thank you. And also I appreciate the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to share my little experience with regard to Takaful from a concept point of view. And when we are talking about Takaful from a concept point of view, I want us to look back at the reason why Takaful comes to play in place of conventional insurance. When the scholar decided that conventional insurance is not Sharia compliant because of the reason given by Shaykh just now, another reason that we know, so then they unanimously agreed that the form of Takaful that should be applied or used is charity and also cooperation. And if you look back at the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, in which Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about ta'awanu ala birri wa taqwa. So this is one of the bases for Takaful. So this first means ta'awanu ala birri wa taqwa, cooperate with one another in righteousness, wa taqwa, and taqwa. And we all know the meaning of taqwa. Taqwa is to avoid anything that will anger Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the meaning of taqwa. So by doing all the obligation, commandment of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the basis of Takaful. So we can see that this is one of the major objectives of Sharia. Because if we look at the highest objective of Sharia, it is best captured in قوله سبحانه وتعالى وما أرسلناك إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So we have never sent you except to be a mercy to the whole universe. So which means the objective of Sharia is universal mercy to the whole universe. So that's why when we are talking about the Sharia, meaning that when we say that a product, whether Takaful or banking or capital market, is in line with the Sharia, it's already captured, it has already captured the ethical or universal ethics that we are talking about. Because one of the components of Sharia is the ethics. And in fact, some scholars they say that you cannot differentiate between ethics and Islam. Meaning that if you say somebody is religious and his akhlaq is zero, this is not part of Islam. So the point is that when we are talking about universal mercy, this is in the Sharia. And we can see the alignments because the basis of Takaful is to ensure the cooperation in attaining righteousness and taqwa. So that's why when we look at characteristic of, that's another point, when we look at the characteristic of Takaful itself, we can see that it is joint indemnity, joint guarantee. And also we can see that the solidarity is there, the trust is there when we are talking about Takaful. And that's why Takaful is different from conventional insurance in the sense that the participant, Takaful participant, they are the one that they protect each other. It is not Takaful operator. So to see that there is peer pressure in the case of Takaful contribution. In fact, if the Tabaru fund is insufficient to cater for the claims, Takaful operator can top up, but it can top up on what basis? On the basis of court. So which means the next time, if the fund, Takaful fund is sufficient enough, then they have to take back whatever any current given. So which means Takaful is joint indemnity, which is joint cooperation. Another point that I would like to draw our attention to in order to realize that the Takaful is in line with the Maqasid al-Sharia is that the hadith that Sheikh just mentioned just now is one of the practical or historical antecedent of Takaful. Another historical antecedent of Takaful is the law of Aqila, whereby if someone accidentally kill another person, so the paternal tribe of the wrong person will pay blood money to the victim family. And this system has been there in Arab tribe. When Islam comes, Islam also endorses it. So and we can see that there is no commercial element. This is also one of the bases of Takaful, to see that there is an alignment between Takaful, right from the origin, right from the basis, even until the practice. Another historical practice related to Takaful is the system of Nihid or Munahada. And we can see that example in Surah Al-Kahf. فَبَعْتُ أَحَدَكُمْ بِوَرِقِكُمْ هَذِهِ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَيُّهَا أَزْكَى طَعَامًا فَلْيَأْتِكُمْ بِرِزْقٍ مِّنْهُ وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ وَلَا يُشْعِرَنَّ بِكُمْ أَحَدًا. So it says that you gather whatever any amount that you have, so that one of you will buy food so that we can eat it together. So this is another form that also established the concept of Takaful. So we can see that it is in line with Makosid. Let me draw us back to round it up. For example, when we are talking about some Takaful products, for example, we have Takaful products for Hajj package, for Umrah package, even for protection of mosques or religious institutions. So this is from protection of religious point of view. We also have Takaful package for education. So this is also in line with protection of intellect. We also have Takaful package for family Takaful. So which is also related to protection of life in Makosid Sharia. The same thing also, especially in the case of general Takaful, which is to protect property. So we can see that it is protection of man. So we can see that the Takaful has, and currently, Shaykh Riyadh mentioned VBIT, value-based intermediation in Malaysia. 2021, the Malaysia BNM, Central Bank of Malaysia, they rolled out the Takaful version of VBIT, which they call value-based intermediation for Takaful, which is also to ensure the alignment between Makosid Sharia, which is the basis, and also Takaful operation. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Sheikh. I think our two scholars highlighted the importance of Takaful, but I think the reality and where I want to go to next is in terms of the take-up and the adoption of Takaful. Ahmed mentioned yesterday a startling statistic about Islamic banking, and I think that statistic is even worse for the Takaful industry. I mean, we probably have on average only one person in this room that may have Takaful, according to the statistics in South Africa. So, Sheikh Ziyaad, maybe we can start with you before we go into the South African experience. In terms of Malaysia, I think what is the experience there, and how do you see the opportunities to grow the Takaful industry, be it with fintech or what are the opportunities there to grow the industry?
جزاكم الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. The experience in Malaysia is, of course, Malaysia is a leading Islamic finance nation, and that includes the Takaful. But even for Malaysia, the Takaful has been significantly challenging. Islamic banking has grown well and has taken more than 40% of the market, but the Takaful has lagged behind. And they are also asking similar questions. Why is the adoption of the Takaful so challenging? And we actually investigated this because we've done a lot of work for the Takaful companies in the country. And conducting market intelligence, I think, is the first thing that we need to do. And this is something that several countries introducing Takaful, they may have an inkling or a kind of perception that because we have a Muslim audience, a Muslim community, they will naturally take something which is permissible. But there are several issues or obstacles before that policy or before that contribution begins, and that participation continues. Malaysia, through market intelligence, we've identified which gender, which income group, which education background would be more inclined towards the Takaful. But we've also identified certain obstacles. And in Malaysia, literacy levels are also an issue. Literacy levels of what Takaful means and how it is different to conventional is also an issue. And that's an issue internationally. But we found that when we talk about sustainability and Takaful, and we've done these market intelligence studies, then customers say, if the Takaful operator has looked into our communities and has projects or incentives or initiatives that will look after the community as a whole, then we want to be part of it. We have a company in Malaysia that launched a few years ago, and they are purely online. So Takaful operator is purely online. And they've done exceptionally well. But there is a challenge. They still lag behind all other Takaful operators. So we dug deeper to understand what's the mindset of the customer, and where's the challenge? Because if everyone's talking about online accessibility, well, Malaysia is quite sophisticated in terms of technology, so you'd expect the customer to immediately take on the product. But we found that customer after customer would tell you, we want the human touch. We want the tech touch, but we want the human touch even more. And that agent needs to speak to us, converse with us, allay our fears, and usually it's a very personalized fear. You have to understand the Malaysian statistic, first of all, is that general Takaful is not a major product. It's less than 20% of the Takaful portfolio in Malaysia. General Takaful, what we talk about is asset cover. 80% is family, is what is referred to as family Takaful, which takes care of what we know as your medical insurance or medical aid, and life Takaful. That's huge in Malaysia. Now, when you want to understand what that is, you want a very personalized explanation. It's your life we're talking about here. So you want a person to sit with you and really understand your position before you are going to take on this policy or this contribution, start making contributions. So that is a major issue. Now, what has driven Malaysian Takaful is the online company, for example, has no exclusions. They have no exclusions. Can you imagine that? Can you just imagine that? There's no exclusions. That means there's no reason for you not to take it. And you're not going to be rejected. It's very simple, and they're very clear. This is all about you. It's all about you. We're here literally to look after you and your family and your loved ones. Another project we've been involved in is, we called it Linking Generations. It's for another Takaful operator. We call it Linking Generations because the Malaysian community is quite close together, meaning that you have grandparents and 3 or 4 generations in and staying in a single house. Now, often you look at the working couple, and that's where the Takaful would be offered. And there was a gap. And the gap was up vertically, you not look after the grandparents in any way. But with this linking generations, you make sure that you have something for them. You have something for the couple, and you have something for their children. And the family Takaful now would look at Hajj and Umrah Takaful. They would look at, of course, the travel Takaful is all hat, but they would look at education policies and make sure that they have the full range of looking after that house. They know everyone in the house is taken care of in some way or another, and that's a very important issue. Now, there is one significant gap that we are currently trying to fill in Malaysia that we find Takaful has really not embraced effectively, and that is mental health. Mental health, for some reason, in most countries, when you look at it from a Takaful perspective, has been ignored. In Malaysia, the stats are quite astounding. You're talking about almost 30% of Malaysians, according to a large Takaful operator, 30% of Malaysians that suffer from some form of mental health issue. Now, we have to understand what the definition of mental health is before we start defining and thinking that everyone is really, not stable. That's not the discussion here. And when we start looking at mental health, especially around the calamities and the disasters we're facing continuously, that has a serious impact on mental health. War, turmoil, political unrest, even currency fluctuations and losing of investments, that all has a major impact. So mental health has been ignored, and further to that, what we've done is devised a lifestyle application for a Takaful operator that actually guides a parent on how to look after his or her child and identify the symptoms early, and identify the symptoms in themselves, and immediately there's access. There's access to association support, free support, and then even further paid support. So you look after the human being, and once you understand what you're doing, then there is this close connection. And the final part is something that we did for the government of Malaysia. And this was initially, it was initiation from the Red Cross, Red Crescent in Malaysia, and they came to us and said, we need an emergency fund, but it must be Sharia compliant, and we don't know anything about Sharia compliant. So we structured an emergency fund, a disaster fund, specifically for floods. I hope that resonates. Because Malaysia is flood prone, and they love to build buildings, so as the cement goes up, the ground becomes less, it has a less ability to absorb the water, so the flood levels rise. And in 2014, you had a major incident in Malaysia in the north where 400 people lost their lives in a very small community because they were cut off from the rest of the city. And we found that reactive approaches and responses simply don't cut it. After the event, after the fact, it's too late. The destruction is already there. And now it's a lot. We calculated it's 25 times more expensive to recover from the flood than having put in proactive measures. So through the disaster fund, which alhamdulillah over the last 2 years, we've got the Red Cross, Red Crescent that supported it, the United Kingdom, the Foreign Commonwealth Office provided funds to support it and develop it. And after we've developed it, we've got the Malaysian government that's come in and actually funded it. But it requires professionalism. So the fund will be managed by a professional asset manager. There's very clear statistics and actuaries on exactly how the claims process works. It's a blended social finance instrument that combines zakat, waqf, and takaful in a very unique way. And in that way, there are proactive measures long before any flood because we've already calculated the cycles. We know when the floods are going to take place. We know when the high-risk period is. For example, in October, we know the communities that are most susceptible, and plans are already in place. And alhamdulillah, through that, you now see a national impact of Islamic finance through sustainability strategies. So I'm going to end there because the time is a lot more we want to talk about. But Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. I think you left us with a lot of food for thought, and also in terms of what we need to achieve here in South Africa. Alex, if I can hand over to you. So family takaful is relatively new in South Africa, and Shaykh Ziyaad mentioned the importance of family takaful in Malaysia. How has your experience been launching your family takaful product and getting it into the market? And how have you experienced it?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about Takaful, family Takaful specifically. So thank you for that. It's very much a privilege. It's also a privilege personally to have met so many people on this journey so far, bringing family Takaful to South Africa. A lot of familiar faces around the room that I've personally engaged with and formed some fantastic relationships. Just some context for the audience. I'm the CEO of Capital Legacy, which is the only Takaful fund operator of Taskia, which is the family Takaful that we've introduced to South Africa. Taskia was driven from, if you come across Capital Legacy, we do two things. We do wills and estates, and in between that we take care of the executive and trustees when you pass away that can cripple the beneficiaries and the legacy that was intended. And in countries such as South Africa, 2 out of 10 people we would need to do a will for would ask for Sharia compliant will. And so we had this big push and this big demand, and we've seen a recent proliferation of Sharia compliant wills in the country. But we didn't quite have the answer. And so then we built a Sharia compliant will. And unfortunately, what happens when you just do a will is that you leave so much not taken care of. Prof. Ahmed mentioned, the challenge in Nigeria about passing away certain or uncertain. If passing away was certain, we wouldn't have the problems we have when people pass away. It's only by virtue of the fact that it's uncertain that it causes so many problems for beneficiaries when they've lost a loved one. And so we strove to not just stop at the will, but to also use the power of life insurance to help people people of the Islamic faith also solve problems that beset them when they pass away and the beneficiaries. Life insurance is a phenomenal technology that can really help solve. It can pay a beneficiary directly. It can fund gaps in your estate. It can give you access to financial instruments to help you further yourself financially. And yet, by it not being permissible in the Islamic faith, this was taken away. And you know, let's be honest, people of the Islamic faith do take life insurance, but it wasn't permissible. And that didn't sit well with us. Because when you offer a service where you take care of one's passing away, you, apart from actually solving the financial problems, the black and white, hard financial problems, your job, I believe, is also to pass on peace of mind, a sense of safety, and of doing well. And if you're a Muslim and you've broken your faith by taking a lifestyle that's not Sharia compliant, we haven't quite done our job. And so our journey in terms of how we experience things is that we felt that let's not stop just at doing the will. Let's do a Sharia compliant life insurance for a family to couple. Because we didn't want to set people up for failure. We don't want to lead you down a path and have a false sense of security or stop short of a complete solution. And this story has really been successful. We've only been going for a year. And it's been a very pragmatic story, lots of engagement with financial advisors, with Islamic financial institutions, people in the knowledge of things. And it's been a working relationship with the South African community who do need this solution. And I really enjoyed the two-way development of this solution, because remember, it's not ours, remember it is the operator, it's something for the community to be able to solve their problems. And that's really done well for us. The take-up has been phenomenal, better than expected. What's been very interesting, and you mentioned it earlier in the online space, is that Tazkiyah is at the moment, in terms of new clients doing the will and the compliant life insurance, it's about a 50-50 split between the financial advisor or intermediary, as we know, and people coming to us via social media, Facebook, searching on Google. And it's very interesting development that we never anticipated. And I think we need to think about that in the community, that maybe people don't want to go through a financial advisor when they're trying to do these things. I don't know why. I always believe in the power of consultation, which you also human touch. And so I think we need to think about things where, well, if you don't want to go through a financial intermediary to see how you can solve your problems when you pass away in a Sharia compliant way, how can we combine or merge technology and the human touch? And that's something that I think will be the next drive we'll have with Tazkiyah. We use, for example, consultants. I'm working at one at the moment, and that's been very successful. It's very well educated, knowledgeable individuals who can sit with an individual and take them through the whole, not just taking a life insurance plan, but rather taking them through their whole journey of if they pass away, from their will, from their estate, from the executive, from the trustees, and ultimately the life insurance. And I think then that gives the peace of mind that we set out to give. And that's been doing very, very well here in South Africa.
Thanks, Ed. So I think that holistic solution is critical in terms of getting more people on. Noor, in terms of you are intermediary financial advisor, and Alex spoke about the challenges that financial advisors face. I mean, how have you seen that market and your engagement on the front line in terms of selling Takaful? What has been the challenges and opportunities?
Firstly, again, thank you to iConsult for hosting us. It's been really beneficial, and I think it's something that we should be part of our calendar every year, inshallah, going forward. And we hope everyone takes benefit from this. Can I pick up the mic? No. So, alhamdulillah, when we started in the early days of Takaful, I think we went through about 4 or 5 years where the uptake was very slow. And there were several reasons for that. Firstly, it was a totally new concept. People traditionally insurance was always haram, and the ulama, unanimously said it's haram. So everyone just continued, although Takaful came along, everyone just continued association. Islamic insurance is insurance, and therefore making it haram. So we identified this after about 5 years, and I think that's where Ammanah was born, was to go out to the market and to engage with people, to create awareness and to educate them as well. And basically, initially it was slow, but alhamdulillah, I think from 2011, 2012, the uptake, there was more awareness created. I think EPSA buying out Takaful also gave it that, this is not a fly-by-night, it's something strong, it's something that's backed by a large financial institution. So yeah, the early days were a bit tough, and that experience and the educating people and creating that awareness was a challenge initially, but alhamdulillah, we thank Allah that He gave us the opportunity mainly to get people out of riba. That was the passion behind it, was to get people out of riba.
What opportunities do you see now?
There's a lot. I mean, we're just talking of all the different products. On the fintech side, there's quite a bit of opportunity as well. The different types of products. Looking at the family side of Takaful, the group life, which was just started recently. In fact, the last product we spoke to Shaykh Dr about was the bereavement funeral policy. And that again shows if we can do products that are reactive or addressing the needs of the community. So with COVID, it was devastating. We had a lot of communities which were struggling to meet payment for janazah. So what happens in some communities also is you would get people, an imam would physically be going knocking on doors saying, so and so passed away, can you contribute to his janazah? So I think janazahs used to cost around 5,000 rand pre-COVID. But then with COVID and you needed to wear this protective suits and all the disinfectants and all of them, went up to 8,000 rand. So that's a massive difference. Also the frequency of janazahs increased with COVID. So what happened was after a while, the imam is knocking on your door, but you don't have any money. And this is something Shaykh as well identified. And what was good there was Bryte reacted to this by developing the bereavement and group family Takaful. So I think the opportunities are there where we need to identify needs pertinent to our community and then to the country as a whole as well, and addressing those needs in the best way. Shaykh Ziyaad just spoke about those floods, and I think that's fantastic. If we could do something like that, and if we look at what just happened recently in KZN, last year we had the riots, this year we're sitting with the floods again, and we're talking of billions of rands worth of damage. And people need to understand that Takaful is this. Takaful is a mutually beneficial pool to mitigate the risks. So we need to come together, and you need the whole ummah to come together. And one of the other areas I think where the biggest opportunity is actually where we can get the ulama to start educating the masses. Because if the ulama can educate the masses, there's still this, like I'm saying, there's still this conception that Takaful is normal insurance. So we need the ulama, inshallah, and I know we have some illustrious ulama here, who can educate other ulama. We need to have a system in place, a concerted effort from all the Islamic financial role players and the ulama to educate ulama, who will then take it down to their community. Because once, remember, this is what we used to always say, unity is strength. And if you look at what's happened last year with the riots, if you look at what's happened now with the flooding, the Muslim Ummah, alhamdulillah, I think charity is in our DNA. It's a pillar of our faith. So for us to pull resources together to help, but these are reactive things where we're helping in specific, because there's riots and lootings, there was food, water, whatever was sent. Right now also, there's a lot of Islamic NGOs and Muslims in the private specifically helping out of just the goodness of the heart, out of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So likewise, like Shaykh Ziyaad is saying, is the cost, like you mentioned 25 times, the cost of being reactive is costly. So we need to have these things in place, but again, we need the ulama support, and I think that education to the ulama will help strengthen us going forward, inshallah.
So Sheikh Ziyaad, your next session on the ulama, I think that's a challenge for you to push the ulama to educate. I think that's one of the key needs of the financial services industry. I think we do have some time. If there's any questions from the audience, Jane, I know this is the other Philippines.
Thank you. I think it's a good product. I feel that we must stop being apologetic about our deen through comparison. And I think we must benchmark what we do against our deen, and Takaful is one of them. And I think we need to say conventional principles for insurance need to meet ours. And I think we must stop going the other way around. I think I have people who try to sell me the Takaful, and I refuse to take it out, and I did it on my own because they told me it's an insurance policy. And I think I should like to have that comment. I know the ulama is supposed to do it, but also the people selling it need to understand. And I like what was stated about what the difference between when you have an exchange transaction, etc. That is not being told. I also like how it was stated, how it goes into our entire deed about collective responsibility for humanity. But we don't speak about it like that. You need an Islamic insurance policy. I think the moment we start moving away from that, I think we won't have this man taking up this type of Islamic practice. I'd just like to hear your comments.
I think Alex and Noor, you guys are the cold face in terms of dealing with customers. And I think from my perspective, I think the key issue is that we're dealing in a market where people already have insurance and we need to convert them. And so the comparison always comes. But I have this insurance, what's my benefits, and what are you going to give me? What's your cost and your benefit? So that comparison always happens. But I suppose, Noor, Alex, you guys can deal with this better.
So thank you for that. So very well heard. When you're in the coalface, as you say, you fall into the trappings of, you've got this insurance plan, and we lose sight sometimes of fundamentally what, in our case, a family couple can achieve and should achieve. So very well heard and noted. I'm going to look at my consultant now and make sure he's also heard and noted. Because we do lose our way sometimes in the, when you're up and down all day, and you also lose sight of exactly what the power of a family couple can actually bring.
So I think one of the things is exactly what you said is we need something to compare to, because it's a totally new concept. Secondly, who's taking out the cover? I mean, one of the major reasons you take out cover is for you buying an asset, buying a property, a vehicle, whatever it is. All the banks in South Africa, I think we've got one of the most heavily regulated financial services industries in the world. So our product would need to meet all these regulations for that paper or confirmation of cover for your insurance to be in place with any bank. So we have to go on something that's similar, established already, and then build from it. Inshallah, we will. Like I'm saying, we look at the bereavement, and we will give it, but it's baby steps. You're not going to just jump onto a totally new concept, and again, it goes back to the education.
No, so I think the point is that the product might be similar, but it's how we sell it. The conversation we're having with the customer, we need to be prepared, and we need to put it in language and in a way that differentiates without comparing, if that's possible. So, any other questions? Anybody else has any questions from the...
But how do we deal with that aspect of uncertainty?
So I'm obviously very novice compared to someone like Dr. Ahmed, but if I may give you my take, my simplistic take on it, and my learnings and being part of the Tazkiyah build, and then I'll ask Dr. Ahmed to do a better job than me. So in terms of removing the elements of uncertainty, so we've solved the exchange, you make a contribution. When you make that contribution, if I may put it another way, you also subscribe for a certain benefit, and that removes the uncertainty. Very similar in a way to how you would subscribe, say, to multi-choice for PhD. You pay a contribution, you get a subscription for a service. You are getting a stated benefit. So that removes the uncertainty, and I understood it. It did that, and also the family Takaful, because it's a mutual fund, removes the excessive exchange that occurs.
The question of uncertainty was certainly going to come about. I actually thought I was speaking too long, so I some people talk about the graveyard session, and this one just becomes part of it. We were going to have the session before lunch. But the problem, actually, Uwaiz's problem, the CD was so long that we had to actually break for lunch. But anyway, the long and short of it is there is uncertainty. In the contract of, or in the Takaful structure, there is uncertainty. The uncertainty is spoken about by the scholars and the jurors. Obviously stemming from the Quran and Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is not allowed in contracts of exchange. Uncertainty in a contract of donation is okay, it's acceptable. So a Takaful is a contract of contribution, a contract of donation, and those type of uncertainties in that type of arrangement is allowed and acceptable.
Just on that aspect of uncertainty, so uncertainty in itself, what's the thinking behind it is that, like as Rinzi mentioned, in a bilateral contract, in a commercial contract, where you're expected to receive a counter value, then uncertainty can lead to dispute. So it's not uncertainty hanging in the air or just an arbitrary uncertainty. It's uncertainty that can lead to dispute because of the fact that it creates that potential for dispute. So the scholars speak about, it's in Arabic, it's called gharar mufdi al-munazam. Now in a non-commercial contract, when you're not expected to receive a counter value, then uncertainty is unlikely to lead to dispute because there isn't any commercial outcome that's expected. So therefore that uncertainty is tolerated. So that's sort of the background behind it.
Barakallah.
We just have one more question. Shaykh Ziyaad, I know we late.
Good afternoon. Thank you. For me, it's not so much a question, but it is a comment. Despite learning so much on Islamic finance over the 2 days, but what I'm realizing is that South Africa is at a stage where we have got so many problems, and it does look like we have solutions in a number of pocket financial policies that are specific to either individuals, religious groups, and so on. And my thinking right now is we as a profession, particularly the financial industry, we have a challenge to actually be speaking out a lot about, because from yesterday's topics on sustainable development goals, the ESGs and everything, that we need to be looking at how do we make use of the principles and the philosophies that we have either in our cultural or in our religious programs that can actually be a solution to the South Africans' problems, because a lot of what we have discussed here can actually resolve the poverty problems, it can resolve the unemployment issues if we really are challenging the government the way that we should be. So it really is a challenge that we need to take. And do not just look at this as something that is only for the Islam religion, but look at it broadly as to how can we use these principles and apply them as a country, and then be able to solve the problems that we are seeing around us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we're all in agreement with you. And Islamic finance by its nature is not only for Muslims. When Shaykh Ziyaad mentioned the experience in Malaysia where non-Muslims are majority users of Islamic finance. And I think there's a challenge to us as an industry is how do we expand that market? I think our challenge has always been that we've got only so much marketing budget, and so we're going to focus that marketing budget on the Muslim community. But the reality is that we've got to open it up. The benefits of Islamic finance, the Takaful, the asset market, is there for all. And we should be able to offer these products and allow or market to the rest of the mass.
So also in terms of the principle, Islam, it's so amazing. And even in the financial systems, it will appeal to anyone across the board. As long as there's ethic and morality. If you look at the principles of Ubuntu, it's fits in flush with what the Islamic principles are, where we all try and pull together to help and benefit each other.
So I think can I just give my panelists at least one minute just to close up. And that's just a closing comment from your side.
I think, to the spirit of where can people go in South Africa, the problems we face is scale. You spoke about how do we make a couple a better product, and the problems that Saskia faces specifically is scale, and having this South African community, you spoke about more generally accepted within the Islamic community, so that we can have an easier path to actually solving when one passes away. I think we need to do a lot more work in terms of education and working with the communities to change perspectives of what is Sharia compliant lifestyle.
I was going to say that Alex stole some of my comments, but it's a problem which has been raised previously as well, the lack of education in the space of the government. I think we really need to go out there and educate people on what the difference is. I know we spoke about comparisons and should we compare, should we not compare. The unfortunate reality is we will always compare. And the reason why we will compare is because customers force us to compare. They will say Takaful is more expensive than conventional insurance, so they already compare. Or if you put your money in Islamic bank, your rate is higher. Or if you finance from an Islamic bank, you're paying more money. So people are always comparing. But we can use that comparison with a positive spin, where we can explain people the differences, where the differences are, where the difference in the Sharia contract, the difference in the difference in the benefits. I think it's time, if we go back to 2003 and 2004, when Takaful was, we feel now that there's so much of education that still has to be done in this field. Imagine in 2003 and 2004, when you first got Takaful's SA, how much of work was needed at that time. So definitely we can see there is some progress, but I would personally think that the progress is too little. We need to do much more homework in the education part.
My take in this is related to the aspect of stakeholder approach. because I think we are all stakeholders. Because now we have realized that Islamic finance is not meant for Muslims only, and we should realize that Islamic finance is as good as mainstream financial system, and that has role to play. And in terms of creating awareness, I think that is something that is very important. And with regard to involvement of the policy makers, I think it has to be from bottom up. So it's not necessary to be from top-down approach. So we have to also raise up our voice that this is what we need, and we let those in charge realize the benefit that is there for the Ummah in South Africa. I think this is our role. So we have to promote it, and this is part of a demonstration of that one from our side. Thank you.
So I think again the education of the Ummah, I think we all need to come together, all the different stakeholders, and try and push this, get people out of riba. We know how many, there's so much dhulm and oppression going on. And one of the first steps is let's get ourselves out of the dhulm and leave riba itself. And then look at the needs of the community and start addressing those. And Takaful is so beautiful. There's so many opportunities worth it to address issues within our communities.
I think that the customer perspective has been discussed, and it's a crucial thing, especially for South Africa. And it's a bit sad that we're having this discussion 17 years on, or 19 years on. That's when we had started the support of Takaful South Africa. But my message is more for the Takaful operators and Islamic financial institutions. You have to collaborate to really get that message out there. And it also means that we need to look at the Takaful value chain. The customer is the front face that you're dealing with, and you've already identified that problem. You've identified that problem 20 years ago. It's not a new problem. But what you really need to look at is to ensure that throughout the value chain, now that there are sustainability strategies expected of you, that needs to be implemented from beginning to end, which means financial literacy at the front end, but ESG and SRI and Sharia compliant investment of the participation fund and the Takaful fund at the back end. And everything in between is about community empowerment and engagement, and of course, Sharia governance. And these gaps are still there. So if you solve the customer part and you leave that out, you're not going to have a holistic solution. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that more concerted effort is required to achieve that, inshallah.
Shukran to the panelists, and thank you for your time. I hope that we left you with something to think about, and inshallah, I mean, there's a lot of work that we need to do as an industry